Very few Genshin Impact characters were released with as much controversy as Kokomi. People took one look at her passive that provides massive negative crit rate, called her a 5-star Barbara, useless character, and she was generally completely panned by the majority of the player base upon release. Over time, however, people have realized that she is not only a wielder of the best element in the game, is by far the best and most reliable AoE Hydro off-field applicator in the game, and she provides enough utility to be the best in slot support for a number of top teams. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Kokomi is an off-field Hydro applicator, healer, and can be a buffer if given the right build. She can also be the bloom trigger in Nilou teams and is arguably the best at it. She can normal attack as an on-field driver in certain other teams, and because she's usually built for HP and heals a lot while she's on the field, she is extremely tanky and very comfy to play as a driver. She's a character with a lot of versatility and a lot of teams and a lot of different ways you can build her, but let's start with her pros and cons. I'd say the biggest strength Kokomi has is that she is the wielder of, I think, the best element in the game. You could make an argument for Dendro, and I wouldn't disagree with you too hard, but I do think Hydro is an absolutely ridiculous element with all the different things it can do, and how pretty much the majority of the best reactions in the game use Hydro. And of course, any character that provides Hydro application then is going to be an incredibly valuable character. Her jellyfish that she places down from her skill has no ICD, which means it places an AoE pulse of Hydro from off-field better than anyone else. The only other off-field Hydro application we have other than her is Mona, whose skill is much smaller, doesn't last as long, and is more unreliable, and Ayato, who a large portion of his power budget goes towards his a normal attacks and skill. So his burst, although it does provide really good AoE Hydro application, it's not as frequent and consistent as Kokomi. It doesn't do that much damage in exchange for not having any other utility, and really it's just not the main focus of his kit. You have to build a ton of energy recharge and you sacrifice a lot of damage, etc, etc. Kokomi's main focus is that Hydro application with her skill and the healing she provides. Another really big pro for her is because she is a Hydro character, she has a ton of options for teams. You can pretty much slot her into the majority of teams realistically. Like if we look through the cast, there's not that many characters that can't work at all with Kokomi. Obviously she works better with some than with others, and she doesn't apply like enough Hydro application for like Hu Tao to vaporize all of her hits or something like that. But even if you're not using in her optimal teams, she can work in just like some plug and play teams. Like if you want to use a Yaimiko team, you can throw in a Kokomi and it won't be that bad. It's not optimal, but you can do it because she's a flexible healer, Hydro applicator, and she can hold. That's another pro, is how many weapon types she can hold. She can hold Thrilling Tales, is probably the most common for a lot of traditional teams that use attack scaling. She has great options for weapons in Nilou teams, or you can give her Prototype Amber for more healing. So she just has a ton of versatility and lots of different things you can do. I was gonna say you can give Favonius Codex to her, but then I realized she doesn't crit. So you can't use Favonius on her. Make sure you don't do that. But the fact that she's so flexible, I would say that her first con, that brings me to her first con, is although she can work in a ton of teams, she's not the best in slot option in all those teams, right? When compared to characters like Yelan or even Sing Cho, who are more focused on damage, she doesn't usually hold up to par because she does offer that healing slot. And that's sort of where she falls off for some teams, is that healing slot can be redundant, right? Any team that you're going to be running Bennett in, for example, like you're not going to want to run Kokomi in instead, because Bennett provides that attack buff, whereas Kokomi's only buffing comes through Thrilling Tales. So if you end up running 2 healers on a team with Kokomi, then you're kind of like, it's kind of redundant, right? There's other characters that you can use that do more damage than she does. So even though she's, a top team for Ayaka, for Nilou, there's not really that many teams that she's like a top unit for. and you can get away with using other characters in her place, so it's not like she's a must-have or required character. And the immediate impact on your account, oftentimes you'll feel a big power spike in your account when you get damaging units. When you get a healer unit, it can make your teams more comfy. If the reason why you're not being able to clear the Spiral Abyss is because you're dying, having a unit that heals can be really, really helpful. And in Nilou teams, she is a big upgrade, but she's not a character that provides more damage than other options in most teams. She's a character that primarily provides comfort, and so that's like a huge pro for some people, either people who don't care about clearing the Spiral Abyss, or for people who have enough damage anyway. So now we have a pretty good idea of what she's good and what she's not good at. Let's talk about her teams. So starting with her freeze teams. Basically, Kokomi is the premier option with Ayaka, and the second best option with Ganyu for Morgana teams, where Mona usually is the better option because the way Ganyu, you're mostly going to use Ganyu with Venti, and this core synergizes really well, and then you should throw Shenhe, Kaya, Rosaria in the last slot. This is kind of the best core. If you don't have Mona, you can throw Kokomi in, and she does very well, but because you don't generally need the healing in a Morgana comp, you generally want to go for Mona instead because she does more damage, and that Hydra application for the freeze isn't as important because Venti's crowd control is so suffocating for the enemies. So you generally are okay to lose the healing from Kokomi to go with Mona instead. It's a different case for Ayaka. Ayaka will normally run this team, and for Ayaka, she's a much more versatile and flexible character, and so is Kazuha, so Morgana works in much fewer enemy situations. Ayaka works in a lot more, so this is generally, I would consider, a better team. And you definitely don't mind as much losing the damage buff that Mona gives, because Kokomi's Hydra application is better suited for this team. You're going to get more consistent freezes, and the healing and the buffing from the Thrilling Tales is going to be very, very valuable for the team, and she's generally the best slot for the freeze team. Although freeze is not as good as it once was, it is still very, very strong, especially when you've got your account like this. I would say if you're thinking of building this team, obviously you need Ayaka, but I would say Shenhe is the least necessary, and Rosaria or Kaya are all right options for this slot. For Nilou teams, Kokomi, I would say, is the second most important piece of the puzzle for Nilou teams. Nahida is the biggest boost, and then you can go for Kokomi. But I would much rather have Nahida and not Kokomi than Kokomi and not have Nahida for my Nilou teams. But that being said, because of, again, her AoE Hydra application, she's going to be superior to characters like Barbara, to Candace, to a bunch of other characters. She will be an upgrade for those teams. I'm really, really excited to try it out. Next is Hyper Bloom. The Hyper Bloom team is really, really great, even with Kokomi, but she's not kind of the best option for a Hyper Bloom team, simply because the double Hydro core is so strong. Xingqiu and Yelan, they buff each other incredibly well, and because double Hydro, because Hyper Bloom is a single target focused team, the AoE Hydro application that Kokomi provides is not as useful for this type of team as it is for a Nilou team. So generally she is a downgrade to one of these characters, but if you're using her with Raiden, it can kind of supplement the fact that you don't have the healer in Kuki. But running Kokomi and Kuki at the same time is sort of, it feels kind of bad, right? Because then you're running two healers for sort of no reason, but it's still a pretty good option. The next team I want to mention is a Quick Bloom team. So Quick Bloom, basically you're trading less Hydra application, so you're not getting as many blooms, but you get more spread uptime. So this is going to be, for example, for your Alhaitham, you're not going to get as many Hyper Blooms, but you're going to get more spread damage from your Alhaitham team, which is good. I wouldn't say it's really an upgrade, but it is a side grade, so it just depends on what you have on your account. That's another flexible option. For Burgeon, she's solid in Burgeon, but I would say the biggest downside is that her Hydra application is not as strong and persistent as Xingqiu and Yelan's, but it is AoE. So the issue becomes when you start getting too much Hydro and Dendro overtaking the enemy. I generally wouldn't recommend Burgeon super strongly with Kokomi. I'd prefer someone with more Hydro application, but it is something that can work. Triple Hydro is a super interesting and comfy team. It utilizes that that really insane core of Xingqiu Yelan, and you use Kokomi as the on-field driver, and then you have Kazuha to reduce resistances. And so she actually does not 0 damage. You actually build her for damage in this team, and this team actually sheets really well. It does quite a bit of damage. Surprisingly, I'm really excited to test it and try it out, and I'll let you know if it's as good as, you know, some people are saying. But generally, if you have these characters, the biggest issue with this team is, although it is quite strong, there's generally just better things you can be doing with this team. You're using a lot of high value characters, so it's sort of like, why, right? Why use all these characters together like this? In teams where you need a lot of Hydro, and Abysses where you need a lot of Hydro, this team is very comfy, like this current Abyss with the Pyro Lector. It's a very good team, and it does solid AoE and single target damage because Kazuha's amazing in AoE, and these two are crazy in single target. And again, Kokomi being a very comfy driver, dealing some damage as well with the clam set. You're probably going to put some Hydro damage bonus on her. This is definitely going to be her highest damaging team on this list anyway. Taser is pretty much forgotten since Dendro, and in the past I haven't been a massive fan of it, but I think the Kokomi Taser team is really quite comfy, and Taser is generally pretty underrated by a lot of people. I think the reason why is because it's very poor in single target. A lot of its damage comes from the reaction of Electrocharge jumping from enemy to enemy, and if you don't at least have a couple targets, it's gonna feel pretty underwhelming to use. But when you have multiple targets, especially, you know, Beta Official built well and Kokomi for clam damage, it's really actually quite a strong reaction and quite a strong team. One of Kokomi's better teams for being on field, and she has really cool normal attack animations and bursts, so it's a really good option for you to use. And then finally for Vaporize, I just wanted to include it here because often Hydro characters are touted as being able to support Vaporize teams. Generally, you just don't want to use her on Vaporize because, again, her strength is AoE Hydro application, but it's not strong enough to sustain like a Zhangling or something like that. And then Yoimiya, Hu Tao, again, their Pyro also will start overtaking her Hydro. Although she has strong AoE Hydro application, it's only really strong in the context of AoE. When you compare it to Xingqiu Yelan, they apply way more Hydro in single target than she does. But again, these teams are just templates, they're baselines. The nice thing about Kokomi is she's so flexible, you can kind of build out the team. Like in an Abyss like this, for example, you can be using a Raiden team, but you can throw in a Kokomi there because you need Hydro for that Abyss Herald, right? Or that Abyss Lector. Or if you happen to be needing your Bennett on the other side, you can throw in a Kokomi. And as long as your other characters are well invested, she can sort of be that glue that glues some teams together. So even if they're not one of these teams, even if they're not optimal teams, as long as you have the damage with your other characters, Kokomi is a nice character that can just slot into so many teams, and even more than I've listed here. Let me know what your favorite Kokomi team is that isn't on this list. The next section is she good for brand new, for mid-game, or for late-game players, and what should each of those players keep in mind if they decide to go for Kokomi? So for new players, it depends on how new we're talking, right? Generally, as a new player, getting a healer character like Kokomi is not going to be as impactful as getting some sort of damaging character. I would prefer, if you're going for just like ways to unlock and untap your account, getting someone like Kokomi is not going to do as much for you as getting someone like a Yelan, getting someone even like a Nilou, as like an Ayaka, like Raiden, like a lot of 5-star characters, because in the beginning, you're going to be most excited and you're going to be most impacted by characters that can deal good damage by themselves. And Kokomi really kind of wants those. She's the glue that holds your other teammates together. So if you're like a brand new and you're going for as your first 5-star, might not be the best very first 5-star, but if you've already got a few characters and you're finding you're lacking that healing or lacking that Hydro, or you want to try different teams like Bloom or Freeze or Hyper Bloom or some of those things, and you're just looking for another Hydro character, you're looking for maybe a healer, then she's a good slot. So I would say she's a better pull for a mid-game or a late-game player trying to unlock their account to all those different playstyles. Not as good for a brand new player, just not as thrilling. But if you love her design, if you love her personality, if you just want to get Kokomi because you want to get her, she's a great character that will last you into the late game. So she can be a really good option. She's just not the first unit that would come to my mind when I think of an impactful unit for a new player. So looking at how to build Kokomi. Starting with level, do you want to level 90 this character? The answer is extremely simple. If you want to play her in Nilou Bloom, yes, you need to level 90 her. If you don't, then no. I would recommend even leaving her level 80 not ascended, because that final ascension does a ton of resources to use, and so you can save a lot of resources by just leaving her at level 80 not ascended. If you're using her in Ayaka Freeze, Burgeon, any of the other teams that I mentioned, let me just double check. Yeah, none of these other teams need her to be at level 90 for her to function at her full capacity, so you can just go for level 80 not ascended to save on resources. But if you're Nilou Bloom, you get about 30% more damage from going from 80 to 90, and your Bloom cores are pretty much the entirety of your team damage. So 30% is a massive amount. So I would highly recommend level 90 or Nilou Bloom. And otherwise, so for her talents, if you're using her as an on-field in like triple Hydro or a Taser team, or as on-field on a Hyper Bloom team, and you're using her for personal damage, Burst is her higher priority because that's where her personal damage comes from. And if you're using her for her Hydro application, so in a Nilou team, a Freeze team, and for her healing, you want to prioritize her skill, because her skill is going to be doing most of the work. Leveling it basically just gives you healing. So if you need more healing, you need to level her skill more. Next is her weapons. Basically, she has a lot of weapons that are good. It just depends on what team. In Freeze teams, Thrilling Tales of the Dragon's Lair is going to be best. In Nilou Bloom teams, Thousand Floating Dreams, Sacrificial Fragments is going to be best. If you need more healing for some reason, you can go with Prototype Amber. I would generally go with a more damaging option, but Prototype Amber is a good option as well. Hakushin Ring is a great option in Taser teams. And then her signature is going to contribute to her personal damage, so it's not always her best option. If you're using her in a Freeze team, like, you're going to get more value out of Thrilling Tales, which is kind of crazy. Same in a Nilou team, you're going to get more value from one of these. But if you're using her as an on-fielder, Everlasting Moonglow is going to be the best option for her personal damage. And then I don't see Baiju's weapon on here. I think it's similar to Everlasting Moonglow in that it contributes to her personal damage. Let's just check this out. So Jadefall Splendor for 3 seconds after using an elemental burst or creating a shield. The equipping character can permanent Jade effect, restore energy, gain elemental damage bonus for every 1000 HP they possess, up to 12%. So yeah, this is going to be pretty good for on-field Kokomi. It's probably going to perform pretty similarly to her signature weapon. So if you have this and you want to be using it on Kokomi, and she's going to be your on-fielder, then that can be a pretty decent choice. For artifacts, it's a very similar story to her weapons. She has great artifact choices depending on what team. For a Freeze team, you can either go with Tenacity or with Ocean Hued Clam. Tenacity would be buffing, obviously, your other members of the team, while Ocean Hued Clam, you'll be maxing out to do good damage. You can go with either. They almost perform about the same for team damage. So really, either set that you have, if you don't want to farm another set, then don't. For her personal damage, obviously she's going to be doing more damage with the Clam set. If you're using her in like a Hyper Bloom team, then Clam is going to be a lot better, because Tenacity is not going to be buffing the team because they don't really value attack. But she could also be holding Deepwood if you don't have other people that want to hold Deepwood. So Deepwood is a really good option if your team is doing Dendro damage and no one else wants to hold Deepwood. But if you're using it on a Nilou team, then you want to be using one of these two sets, which is the Flowers of Paradise Lost or Gilded Dreams. Flowers of Paradise Lost, these are basically for Nilou teams. So let's do this. Nilou, Freeze, no other Deepwood user. And then generally good option pretty much for most teams, you can just use Clam. The only team I wouldn't use Clam is in a Nilou team, because she's not going to be maxed out for healing. She's going to be maxed out for these. And then finally, this is good for Nilou. You can use a two-piece if you don't have 4-piece Flowers or 4-piece Gilded yet. If you're early game and you have a couple of Maiden's Beloved pieces or something and you want to use the 2-piece for more healing, you can, but it's generally not really a very useful set. You'd rather do something that contributes more damage than something that heals you more, because her healing is enough by itself. For gameplay tips, the only one I really have is just about positioning. You can't very easily reposition her skill if you misplace it, so you really want to place it in the middle of the enemies, and you want to get good at using her burst to refresh her skill when you need to. So you don't always need to refresh her skill. Like if you're on an Ayaka team, you don't always need your skill to have 100% uptime, but if you can plan your burst to know kind of when your skill is going to be ending, your burst refreshes the duration of that jellyfish, so you can get 100% uptime in that scenario, but it's not required to learn. I would mostly focus on that positioning of that jellyfish. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips on how to play her as well, as I'll be getting her as soon as her banner reruns right now. Finally, for value, how she feels to play, how strong she feels. So I don't have her yet, so I can't tell you how strong she feels and how she feels to play. My understanding is having that Hydro application, it feels really, really good in a freeze team, in a Nilou team. It's just really nice to have solid AoE Hydro application for teams that need it, and no one really does it like Kokomi. I also know she's very comfortable. I've heard she's similar to Zhongli in the sense that when you have her on the team, you just feel like you're invincible, that you can't die, except for potentially on a Nilou team where she's built for EM instead of HP. And in terms of value, as you know, if you haven't seen my value video, I'm not a believer in general pull value, but I still like to talk about it anyways, because I like to talk about value in the context of your account specifically. So basically, if you're in the spot that I talked about earlier, where you're wanting to, you've built a bunch of these teams and you're kind of short on a Hydro unit, you're short on a healer, then she can be a valuable pull for your account, depending what your account is lacking. But if you've already got, you know, a Mona, a Xingqiu, a Yelan, stuff like that, and you've already kind of built the teams you want, unless you're really looking to upgrade your Ayaka team or your Nilou team, then she's generally not going to be great for you. In terms of power level, I would say she's actually quite high because she is a top unit in two really, really top tier teams. I would say the Nilou team is a top tier team, and the Ayaka, depending on if you're a free-to-play level investment or a higher than free-to-play level investment, like a Dolphin level investment, that's a top team potentially as well. So, and Kokomi being a best in slot option, both of those teams, is a really, really good choice. So I would rank her pretty high, probably top of A tier, maybe not quite into S tier. I don't do SS plus, so A tier is the second one from the top. So I'd say she's really, really, really powerful, really strong unit, especially in those teams. For future prospects, we've got Fontaine coming up, Nation of Hydro. It's really hard to say whether she will gain in value from whatever changes they make in Fontaine, or whether she'll lose value because other Hydro characters come out. Other characters that provide AoE Hydro application but provide damage instead of healing might make her less desirable in certain situations. But if there's ever more teams that require AoE Hydro and a healer, she's sort of like the perfect option for that. So I think she'll always have a place in the game because I don't see them making another AoE Hydro application healer that applies Hydro from off field. I just don't see that happening. So I think she'll always retain her place in the meta as a pretty strong place, but I could see her dipping a bit when we get more damage focused options at some point. And for Overworld and aesthetic, she's a very, very comfy character to use in the Overworld. Overworld doesn't require you to do a ton of damage. So like if you're struggling with weekly bosses, if you're struggling with, you know, bosses that do a ton of damage, or you just want a comfy character, a healer for the Overworld, I really like running a healer in the Overworld. I don't like running the Overworld without a healer, even though I often run the Abyss without a healer. So she can be a really nice comfy pick for the Overworld. And Clam, if you get a Clam set for her, can do some good damage and probably claps the Overworld no problem. And then aesthetic, I mean, Genshin never misses. I think her haircut is not my favorite. If she would probably be like a top tier designed character for me if I liked her haircut more. I know it's a great haircut, it's just not my personal preference, but I love the mermaid vibe. You know, I love her flowy animations. I love her, you know, decorations here, and just how she's designed, and her lore of being a strategist is really cool. I wish we could see more of her actually strategizing in the game, but I really, really like her aesthetic overall. It's also worthy to note that she can walk on water in the Overworld when you use her burst, but it only lasts for the duration of her burst, which isn't that long. So decently useful, but not crazy useful. Not like Ayaka, who can do infinite walk on water. If you've been enjoying the content, please consider subscribing. It is really, really valuable for me to make more videos like this and support my family. It really goes a long way. If you want to see where I put Kokomi on my tier list, I made an amazing tier list that I put a ton of effort into, and it is really, really useful if you're trying to figure out who the strong characters in Genshin are and which of your favorites that maybe you should build if you want to build the strongest out of your favorites, for example. So check out that video there, and bye for now.